Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for taking time and talking with us back in Augusta about this new report. Now, this is from the Bipartisan Policy Center. Can you just kind of give a little brief overview about what that is?
Yes, actually, the Bipartisan Policy Center was founded in 2007 by 4 former Senate Majority Leaders, including our own former Senator George Mitchell, Senator Tom Daschle, and former Senators Howard Baker and Bob Dole. And the whole premise behind the Bipartisan Policy Center is to achieve principled solutions through rigorous analysis and reasoned negotiation and respectful dialogue on some of the critical issues facing this country. And one of the outgrowths of the Bipartisan Policy Center was to create a commission on political reform, which I co-chair along with former Senate Majority Leader Senator Trent Lott and Senator Tom Daschle and former Secretary of Interior Dan Glickman and former Senator and Secretary Dirk Kempthorne, included 29 members of the commission, and we had been working for almost, since at least 2 years. I obviously joined in the beginning of 2013, and it culminating in this report that was released yesterday.
Which is called Governing in a Polarized America, a Bipartisan Blueprint to Strengthen Our Democracy. So this is happening. This isn't just my perception that things are becoming more polarized. I mean, you've been in there in the trenches. This is really going on in Washington. It's getting kind of uglier at times, isn't it?
Well, Renee, absolutely, and that's what's so disturbing, not only to all of us who are working on this report, but the people with whom we engaged in 4 town meetings across this country over the last 2 years. And in addition to that, I have been crisscrossing America, speaking, at the end of this year, I'll have been in 25 states, speaking to on college campuses and to all kinds of organizations and conferences. And I can tell you it is universal that people are totally despairing of what's transpired in Washington, the polarization, and has become exponentially so even since my departure in 2012. And it was bad then. Yeah, and it's even infinitely worse now.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if that was just because we have these 24-hour news cycles and so much information that's available now, more so than, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But it really is getting worse. It's not just because we're seeing more info.
No. I mean, I think the way in which much of it, is translated and transmitted to the American people, suggesting there's only one side or the other, and there's no ability to reconcile the differences, I think only enhances and accelerates the polarization. But the polarization has already occurred in the political system itself. It's been nurtured in the, campaigns of, with the politics of destruction and demonizing the other side, the millions of dollars that are spent in these advertisings almost perpetually from outside groups that constantly enhances that divide and the absolutes, and that has spilled over in the legislative arena where, members of Congress are more concerned about what will happen in a primary, whether or not they'll be challenged by a primary opponent, as opposed to what would be of concern to people in the general election. So that has all, I think, really transformed the political landscape enormously. That has, ultimately reflected in the legislative process that, where the outcome has been gridlock and political paralysis.
So this new report, you all focused on, it pretty much came down to 3 general areas, didn't it? Of electoral process, the process by which Congress legislation manages its own affairs, and then the one I found most interesting, the ability of Americans to plug into the nation's civic life through public service.
Correct.
A lot of these sound really wonderful. How does this happen? How do these ideas, and some of them are like, well, yeah, that makes so much sense. How do we get this to start to move forward so we can overcome some of these obstacles and come back together? Well,
it's an excellent question, and one that we also addressed as well within the commission itself and the Bipartisan Policy Center. As we said yesterday, that was releasing the report was the first step in the process. Now I think we have to move forward and with an outreach plan that we have developed and a multi-pronged strategy that will work both within Washington and outside Washington in building a national movement. So coinciding with the release of this report, we also launched the Citizens for Political Reform, which will be a national movement to serve as a catalyst to engage Americans to drive the reforms. They can go to our website, bipartisanpolicy.org, look at the recommendations, discover how they can implement them, through citizens, referenda, petition drives, to get, some of these questions on the ballots, and also making elected officials and candidates accountable. So we plan to work with organizations. We'll be speaking on numerous college campuses and with other groups to hold forums all through the fall into next year, because we also want to drive the rules changes that we were talking about as well for congressional reform. So we'll be working with members of Congress and staff as well, and obviously doing everything that we can to drive the change. But the public has to become involved in this process. It's not going to happen alone. We have to do it together to provide the kind of leverage and incentives for this to turn around.
Well, that's what I really loved about these areas of focus, talking about that third area, getting Americans to plug into this. And there was a big focus on young Americans in this, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. One of the disconcerting aspects to the net effect and result of this polarization is that it has alienated so many young Americans. And I know that to be true because, as I said, I have, addressed numerous student audiences on college campuses all across America. And, the young people want to be engaged in public service. But when it comes to politics and running for public office, that's another issue altogether. So, first of all, we have to nurture the whole notion of wanting to participate in some realm of public service. It doesn't have to be running for office, but we also want to, encourage them to think about running for public office. Because, as I said to them so many times, that when you're in the arena, you will be able to change it. I left the United States Senate because I had served for 34 years in Congress and 40 years overall. But now I saw my mission differently, to encourage support on the outside to become involved, because in that way they can change it. And it obviously matters profoundly for their own futures. Otherwise, they're going to allow a small minority to dictate and determine the direction and the destiny of America.
Well, I think this is a fantastic report. I've read the summaries. I have not read the entire thing, and I think a lot of it just makes so much sense. And the entire group, you said 29 who worked on this to bring all these recommendations together. And I definitely encourage anybody to take a look at it. So thank you all for your hard work on this. Former U.S. Senator Olympia Snowe, thank you for your time today talking about this and about how maybe we can reduce the decisiveness in our government. So thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Renee, and I appreciate being on your program.
Anytime.